when the dollar collapses, it's not going to be like when the Zimbabwe dollar collapses or the Venezuelan Bolivar or the Argentina Peso. It's going to rock the world. And China and Russia are getting prepared for it right now, and you should be too.
Hey friends, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We have Jeff Berwick from the DollarVigilante.com on the line to talk about all things September, October collapse, and Shemitah. Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing good. Very busy, but good. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, man. So let me get this straight. That's Acapulco behind you. That's the bay. I've been there once before with my wife many years ago, probably 15 years ago now, and it's as beautiful as I remember it. So what's the deal down there in Acapulco? Do you feel safe? Do you love it? Mexico's the place to be?
Yeah, that's why I'm here. I absolutely, totally love it. Acapulco in general is so much more free and so much safer in general than many places in the U.S. Especially if if you live in the main areas, the tourist areas, or the areas where people with money live. It's pretty much totally safe. All this media propaganda about Mexico being dangerous is mostly, there is some truth to it, but it's mostly the cartels, which are, of course, all related to the war on drugs started by the U.S., which is horrible. And then the cartels as well are also involved with the CIA to whip up some frenzy down here, some chaos from time to time to get people to continue to allow this to happen, for the U.S. government to keep giving the Mexican government money to fight this problem that they've created. It's the same old story that just happens over and over and over again. But if you're not involved in the plant trade or the drug trade, which should all be legal, obviously, then there's really not that many problems in Mexico. There's certain areas, of course, that have some problems, but I feel much less safe when I go up to the U.S. in many places than I do here in Mexico.
You know, the illegal drug trade really cracks me up because we know the CIA brings the drugs in. Mike Rupert and others have exposed that, and it kills me because here we are in Afghanistan guarding the poppies, and heroin trade is at an all-time high, where prior to us being there, the Taliban had it at an all-time low. And it's just clear what's going on with the drug trade. And I'll tell you this, I was watching your video, Shemitah Exposed Financial Crisis Plan for September 2015. It has 1.66 million views right now. And I was looking at this quote. You said, "They are preparing for a major societal collapse. It's obvious, and it will happen." And below that in the freeze frame is a scroll from the Blaze which says, "Police pose as 11th graders, arrest 22 California students in drug sting." So they pose as 11th graders and go in and bust a bunch of kids, probably for selling pot, so that they can send those kids back to the state-run prisons. It's just, you're right, man, this is a police state in this nation.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's not many countries that do things like that, and you could have pretty much taken any freeze frame of any CNN or Blaze or any sort of mainstream media channel at any moment in time, and you'll just see ridiculous things like that all the time. The U.S. has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population, and people say it's dangerous in Mexico. That's why I say it's so dangerous in the U.S. It's not so much the people and the crime in general. It's the government. Whenever I go up, I always have a problem. I regularly end up in handcuffs, and it's partly because I'm not one of those kind of people who just goes along and says, "Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service and protecting the community." But I oftentimes end up in handcuffs in the U.S. And even I was just up in Austin, Texas. I don't remember when, about a while ago, within the last year, and I stepped off the curb to hail a taxi, and a cop said, "Get back on the curb." And I just looked at him like, first of all, why are you bothering me? And you're armed, and you're making sort of like threats at me, telling me to do something. This is not cool. But I did step sort of halfway back on the curb just to make a point, but I didn't step fully on the curb, and he came over and he punched me in the ribs. I wasn't going to get into a physical confrontation with two armed guys, but that's very typical of what's going on in the U.S. A lot of people, especially the older people, don't really realize what's going on because a lot of them, say you're 60 or 70, you're spending most of your day in your house or in your social club playing bridge or whatever. So you're not out on the streets where a lot of the younger people are, and just seeing how they're just everywhere in a lot of these cities. Not all of them, of course, but in a lot, just cops on every corner watching you. You just almost can't do anything anymore in the U.S. without the threat of being kidnapped, which is arrested, and put into a rape camp, which is called prison.
Yeah, well, you recall back in the days of the Andy Griffith Show, policemen were called peace officers, Jeff, and today they're militarized thugs. And, here's a glimmer of hope, at least since we're on this topic. California bill bans police from getting grenade launchers and tanks from feds. Now, that comes from antimedia.org. And it's a glimmer of hope because, again, here is the tyrannical federal government trying to militarize police across this nation. And, at least in this case, a glimmer of hope that Californians are saying, we really don't want our police, our peace officers, to have grenade launchers and tanks. Glimmer of hope?
Well, to me, it just reinstates how bad it is in the U.S. that they need a law for that.
Yeah.
What's the next one going to be? A law banning police from having nuclear weapons, from having ICBMs. It's out of control up there, and even just these sort of things. To me, it's just sort of shows the situation, and of course, we know that already police across the country have been given most of these sort of weapons, tanks and bobcats and all sorts of anti-mine vehicles, and this is all planned. And we just ended Jade Helm today. Now, I haven't seen any dispersal of any of this equipment that they've been putting all over the country yet. I actually think it's being put in place for a reason, and I think we'll probably find out the reason in the next few months. But this has been planned. They know something. They know that there's going to be a crisis. The dollar is going to have some sort of issue. There's going to be perhaps some sort of war. We're seeing Russia and the U.S. and China all over the place, saber rattling. In fact, Russia is currently at war with the U.S. in Syria because the Russia is apparently with their biggest deployment of troops outside of Russia since the USSR collapsed, are in Syria right now and are in military action. And they say they're there to fight ISIS. And the U.S. is also there, and they say they're fighting ISIS. But we all know that ISIS is backed by the U.S. government. They essentially founded it, they've supplied it, they've funded it, and so with Russia attacking ISIS right now, it's actually Russia versus the U.S. So this can go very, very bad very quickly. I don't know what's going to happen. I said that in the Shemitah Exposed video, that any number of black swans can happen here, but they're trying to create some sort of crisis right now, and it's going to get much worse this fall, in my opinion.
As it relates to Syria, Putin is providing what I see to be a counterbalance to NATO, Pentagon, ISIS overreach, right? And of course, ISIS is part of the Pentagon. You're right. It's it's a rebranding of Al Qaeda, which was created by these same neocons, these same monsters that want endless war. And thank goodness Putin is providing a counterbalance, because he knows, and the world knows, that if the Pentagon is allowed to do what it's been doing, it will just turn Syria into another Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. It'll turn it into an absolute hellhole, which is why we're seeing all these refugees now. They're just trying to escape the hell that's been unleashed upon them. And who can blame these poor folks for trying to get out of Dodge with their children lest they be murdered?
Yeah, and it's sort of weird for me. I'm a anarchist. I don't like any government or politician in general, but I actually find myself cheering for Putin a lot, which is a very strange sort of thing, especially when you think back to 20 years ago. There's absolutely no way, or 30 years ago, that I'd be like cheering for the Soviet Union or a communist China when it used to be communist. But he's actually is providing somewhat of a slowing down of this neocon agenda, but they're not going to stop. We're seeing that already, and so this Syria conflict, I expect, will get incredibly bad, in my opinion. You've got Russian jets and U.S. jets all flying over there. They both say they're fighting ISIS, but one side's lying, and this has just disaster written all over it. And you brought up the refugees. This has actually been planned now for years. They actually had most of those refugees countries in Turkey for the last few years. There's literally camps. Turkey has been spending billions of dollars, which I believe they get from the U.S., to house a lot of the people from Libya when their country was destroyed by Hillary Clinton and the U.S. government, and now from Syria and all sorts of other areas as well. They've been actually housing them, and that's why people in Europe, it's so bizarre to see that everyone's like, wow, where are all these people coming from? This is just a must be just a really weird event that is unexplainable. It's like, no, this was all planned. Wesley Clark stated just after 9/11 the number of countries and the exact countries they wished to attack and occupy and take over and destroy, and one of them was Syria, and the last one, by the way, was Iran. And so this has been a plan. They've been destroying areas all over the place, and now they've been housing like 1 million of them in Turkey, and they just unleashed them all in the last few weeks, and everyone's all confused. They don't know why this happened, but this, if you just have any sort of sense or look into anything, it's obvious why it happened. And a big part of the agenda is to essentially destabilize Europe. So they want to, and we've seen this on the exact end of the Shemitah day, which was on Sunday, the Eurozone essentially collapsed. All of a sudden, in one day, borders were put up again in a place that hasn't had borders in the Schengen area for more than a decade. All of a sudden, there was borders in Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, Serbia, Slovenia. I believe there's one going up right now in Italy, Denmark. So the Eurozone essentially pretty much collapsed over the weekend. And as at the exact same time, Europe said they're going to start their own army now. So Europe, which was supposed to be the Eurozone, which was supposed to be created to stop some sort of war or conflict, now is trying to have its own army. So this is all part of the agenda that most people are, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, but your average sheeple on the street has no idea, and they just see these as disparate events that just happen from time to time. Just, oh, that was weird, and that was weird. I guess, just a coincidence or something, but this is a big agenda to bring in essentially a new world order, a one world government. And we're seeing the UN meet this week as well, just started today, the 70th anniversary Jubilee session of the UN. We'll see what comes out of that, but they're talking a lot about one world government. Even the Pope's going to be there, and he's been talking like crazy about communism and how he wants the world to be communist. And that essentially is sort of what they want. They want a one world communist government is essentially what they want, and or sort of fascist as well. It's sort of like a mix of the worst two ideologies of all time. Fascism and communism is what they want, and we're seeing that even with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's essentially a fascist takeover of numerous countries, including the U.S. Corporate takeover. So there's a lot in motion right now, and there's no way this ends nicely. There's going to be crisis or disaster after disaster in the coming months, and definitely in the next year.
Man, I love talking with you. Why has it been so long since we last spoke? When you mentioned the neocon plan, there's a neocon plan that's rolling out. And, of course, I recall Zygmunt Brzezinski and the Grand Chessboard. You mentioned Wesley Clark. All of this stuff has been planned for decades. And, of course, you guys are all aware of PNAC, the Project for a New American Century. Isn't it funny, Jeff, how they use terms like that? For instance, the Patriot Act. It's the furthest thing from being patriotic. Now that we see all of this rolling out, and we know that so many of the people who were involved with PNAC were Zionists, or dual citizens of Israel, and that they did not have the best interests of our nation at heart when they wanted to implement these plans. It strikes me that PNAC, Project for a New American Century, is just like Patriot Act. It should have been called Project for a New Israeli Century, because these people do not serve this country. They've taken us to war after war after war. They've bankrupted the treasury. They've destroyed our young men that have gone over there and come back either in body bags or with parts missing, and they don't care. They're not going to stop because they're evil, and they do want to usher in this new world order, and it will not include America. This America that we have today with the dollar, that's all going away, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and that's part of their plan. They've been planning this for quite a while, so the dollar collapse is being planned. They plan to essentially put in a one world sort of currency. You can see where this is all going. And of course, we need more than one government. We need 7 billion governments, and we need a currency that's not controlled by anybody, which would be things like gold, silver, and Bitcoin, and not pieces of paper with dead criminals printed on it that any central banker can print up at will and totally manipulate and destroy the economies and impoverish everybody. So yeah, it's been planned. If people don't know, they got to open their eyes soon. I know a lot of people won't really wake up until it's on their doorstep, which is always the case. So many Jews, for example, in Germany in 1942, were still sitting there saying, "Oh, I think we'll be okay." Some people, for whatever reason, just won't face reality until it's actually right in their face, and by then it's too late. So that's very unfortunate for them. But yeah, there's a lot going on. You mentioned PNAC, of course. They essentially planned 9/11, along with, I believe, Mossad.
Yep.
And just so people know, I'm not against Jewish people at all. But I'm very against the Israeli government and Mossad. They're just as evil as the U.S. government and the CIA, and they essentially do control a lot of the factions of the U.S. government and CIA. So yeah, this is this is way bigger than anyone knows. It's going to get incredibly bad unless people wake up. And even if people wake up, it's still going to get pretty bad for a while. We're going to have to go through a complete collapse of the financial system, the economic systems, government, which would be good. So either way, there's not going to be an easy way out at this time. And if people don't start to wake up, it's going to get really, really bad, so bad that no one will believe it in 5 or 10 years. But thankfully we have the internet, so we can spread this information. And if people start to get this information, it changes things. Like, for example, Syria. The U.S. really wanted to attack Syria a couple years ago, but they couldn't get the popular support for it. And so they tried to do a false flag attack, killed a few thousand people in Syria using gas, and tried to blame it on Assad. And so many people on the internet were exposing that it wasn't Assad, it was NATO or the U.S. government or CIA or all three, that they couldn't get away with it. So that's why they had to do this ISIS thing, which just came out of nowhere. People have to start to realize these things just come out of nowhere all the time. ISIS, if you said that word 2 years ago, I don't know if that was even a word. Now it's the most critical, important thing we must fight in the world. And then if you look at these refugees, they just came out of nowhere. And in the last week, all of a sudden, there's a million of them there. It's like, okay, this was all sort of planned. So people have to wake up to what's going on, turn off their televisions. It's called programming for a reason. And the more people that we can get to at least listen or figure out some of this information, the less luck or ability the world controllers, the financial elite, those sort of people have, because they actually do need our consent in certain ways to do what they're doing. It's very much like a vampire. They can't really come into your house, using this as a metaphor, unless you let them in. And what people have been doing all around the world for decades now is letting them in because they believe their lies. So it's going to be a very, very interesting time. I've got a lot of optimistic hope for the future and a lot of very pessimistic as well. And I think it's going to get bad before we have a chance of it actually having a much more free and more prosperous world if we can get rid of these central banks and these giant governments and things like the CIA.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more when you say that, we are complicit because we allow this to happen. We have to participate in the tyranny to allow it. And there's really no better example than our volunteer army. We have a volunteer military in this nation. There should come a point where these guys understand how tyrannical things are, and it should end. If it's a volunteer military, then get the hell out. And I want to go back to something very, very important you said, and you said regarding 9/11 that you believe that the Israeli Mossad was certainly involved in that as well, and I could not agree more. I just posted a video recently called 9/11 From Cheney to Mossad, and it's a very, very important video that will shock people to their core, because in that building, in the 4 years, I found out, Jeff, in the 4 years preceding 9/11, were these Israeli quote-unquote art students, many of whom were bomb experts, tying back to the Mossad, and this is all in an FBI report. It's proven, and they were in the buildings doing their art project with full access to the 91st floor for 4 years in in the North Tower prior to 9/11. It's really, really stunning. So when we get angry at the state of Israel, that's not anti-Semitism. That's called logic. And that anti-Semitism BS label no longer works because the world is waking up to the tyranny coming from the CIA, the Pentagon, the Mossad, Israel, the Saudi government. We get it, right? Those of us who are awake get it. And the anti-Semitic label does not work anymore. Now, I want to circle back to waking up the sheeple people here in this country and across the world. Jeff, you said in your documentary, we're in the last days of this financial system in the United States. This is Zimbabwe. The ship is going down. This is the USSR in 1989, end quote. Jeff, help people understand how critical it is that they wake up and protect themselves, because Shemitah aside, the collapse is coming, whether it happens here in September or October, or we're off by a year and it's next September or October. The collapse is coming. This petrodollar paradigm is on shaky ground.
Yeah, shaky grounds to real understatement. This is baked in the cake. It will happen. You just look at the numbers alone, the amount of U.S. Government debt. It's rising tremendously. It's doubled since 2008. That says a lot. So since Barack Obama, not that it's all his fault, he's actually just a teleprompter reader. He has nothing to do with anything. I can't believe anyone thinks he does. He's actually put under his administration has put the U.S. into more debt than every single president before him up to Washington combined. It's now at 18 trillion, but that doesn't even include all the liabilities, which are things like socialist insecurity and Medicaid and Medicare and all those sort of things. If you add those up, because they don't account for it properly, it's over $95 trillion, which is about $300,000 per person in the U.S. So for a family of four, there's $1.2 million of U.S. government debt and liabilities overhanging it. Clearly unsustainable. If anyone doesn't see that, I don't know what I can tell you. And so this is going down no matter what. And a lot of other countries have realized it. And China and Russia have been some of the biggest. And they've been moving away from the dollar dramatically. China this year sold it was a very large amount, over $100 billion in the first 6 months of U.S. Treasuries. And in the last 2 months, they sold another $100 billion. They only had $1 trillion total. So that's about 20% this year. And they sped it up dramatically in the last few weeks. They're also trying to institute their own payment system called the China CHIPS, I believe, is the acronym for it. It's essentially a competitor to SWIFT. They're moving away from the dollar. Russia's been accumulating gold very smartly, as has China. They both have, and moving away from the dollar. And they're constantly doing trade agreements without the dollar now. And we're starting to see, interestingly, in Saudi Arabia, which was really where the petrodollar was based out of, a lot of interesting things going on there. First of all, Saudi Arabia has been attacking Yemen. No one's talking about that. That's very interesting. They're trying to sort of blame now 9/11 on Saudi Arabia. They're saying these 28 pages of classified documents that they haven't released, but people are saying it's something to do with Saudi Arabia. I think what their plan is to the next stage is to release these documents, and they'll be mostly lies again, but they will say it was Saudi Arabia who did 9/11, and then the U.S. will go after Saudi Arabia now for moving away from the U.S. dollar hegemony, petrodollar, and that's what they've been doing as well. Of course, every other country that tried to do it, Iraq tried to do it. They tried to sell oil for euros. A few months or a few years later, at least, Saddam Hussein was hung, and then it was Muammar Gaddafi in Libya who tried to start up a gold-backed African currency, and then he was raped by a pipe and murdered on live television while Hillary Clinton cackled away. So it's quite clear. And then as soon as the U.S. attacked Libya, the very next day, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. So the very next day after they had destroyed Libya and literally ruined millions of people's lives, these are some of the people running now, unfortunately, and these are real people. This is a tragic, tragic, tragic situation, a massive crime, a massive terrorist attack again by the U.S. government. And the very next day after they destroyed Libya, they installed a central bank. That is always the goal. And there's only a few countries left that don't have a Rothschild-backed central bank. And one of those is Iran. So that's why everything is starting to coalesce in the Middle East right now. They're trying to take out Iran next. And that's going to get very bad because China and Russia have said that they will back Iran. So this is World War III on the cusp right now. And it probably will happen to one degree or another. even in Syria, as I pointed out. And then there's the Ukraine, where the U.S., again, big fans of democracy, went in and took out the last president, caused a major chaos, and started what happened there. And then Russia stood up to them. They didn't so much in Georgia, but in Ukraine they did. So this is getting very close to some major things happening. The U.S. saber rattling with Russia and China is nothing like saber rattling with very poor Iraq and Afghanistan, which they still couldn't even really win the war against those countries. There's no chance against Russia and China, and I don't know how far this goes, but if you're not being careful and not watching your assets, especially as an American, and keeping your assets in a U.S. bank account, the U.S. dollar is going to be destroyed in one way or another in the next few years. And U.S. banks are going to see the same thing that we've seen in Greece and Cyprus. So if you're not paying attention, getting your assets outside of the system now, and even getting outside of the U.S. if you can, because I think it's going to be a lot of chaos there as all this happens. I don't know what to tell you. I'd rather be a year early than a day late when it comes to these sort of things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And just a couple of things. I need to make a correction. When I was telling you about the art students, I mentioned the FBI report. That was actually a detailed DEA report, which outlined the Mossad involvement with these art students, these actual agents pretending to be art students in the United States prior to 9/11. 4 years spent in the North Tower, World Trade Center, floor 91. Of course, Larry Silverstein must have known about that. And, you mentioned the 28 classified pages of the 9/11 report. Again, Saudi Arabia, of the hijackers said to be on those planes, 5 of them later turned up to be alive. They will put the blame on Saudi Arabia to try to take the blame away from Israel, who had the means, the motive, and the opportunity with those bomb experts in World Trade Center, North Tower, 4 years prior to 9/11. So it's just very important to talk about these things, because the only way we can take our nation back, and I'm a little skeptical that we can at this point, Jeff, is to wake up people. And people are scared to death to look at the 9/11 issue. The sheeple people are scared to death to look at it because they don't want their false paradigm broken. They don't want to break their normalcy bias. They don't want to think that the boogeyman in our government is worse than the CIA-controlled boogeyman that they don't even know is CIA-controlled in Osama bin Laden. So they believe the official story because it's easier to believe it than to believe that our government or aspects of our government could be so profoundly evil. And therein lies the rub. They don't want to look at the truth about their government, about false flag terror, or about the collapse of the dollar. And the dollar is going to collapse. So let's talk about precious metals briefly. Just saw this report from the COMEX. There is now 228 ounces of paper gold claims for every ounce of deliverable registered physical gold at the COMEX. That's not to even speak of the horrors going on at the bullion banks, Jeff. What do you make of physical precious metals? How in the world can silver still only be at $14 an ounce?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the precious metals markets right now, and I made a statement a couple of years ago. I said there will come a time when you won't be able to buy physical silver or gold in exchange for fiat currencies, and we're almost at that level with silver right now. You just pointed out the COMEX obviously doesn't have anywhere near the amount it would need to actually pay people if they actually wanted the physical. But there's almost anywhere in the world right now, it's almost impossible to buy silver coins. I'm here in Mexico, and Mexico, of course, is the largest producer of silver in the world. So you would think it'd be fairly easy to get a few silver coins. There's literally none in Mexico right now that you can buy at any sort of regular place, bank or institution. You might be able to buy it off a friend if he's willing to sell it, but there's none available right now. And this, I've been getting reports from all over the world. We're doing another article in our next upcoming newsletter, the Dollar Vigilante. We're doing some research that literally all around the world, you can't get access to silver coins right now. And if you can, the margins, the premium over the paper spot price is astronomical. It's for example, for junk silver, what they call it junk silver, but of course silver is never junk, but that's just the word for those old pre-1960 silver dimes and things like that. The premium a year ago over spot price was 5%, and that was when silver was a lot higher in price as well, the paper spot price. It's currently 45% over spot price. So that is astronomical in precious metals terms. And you have to wonder how long and how high these margins have to go. What, 100% over spot? So if silver's, let's just say $17 today, if you can't buy it for less than $34 anywhere, at what point do people start to wonder about the paper spot price? Or maybe the physical price goes to 50 or 60, and then the spot price is still at 17. Most people at that point, you would think, would start to wake up, and then what would happen is you'd see a lot of people that things like the COMEX trying to withdraw the actual physical silver because they'd realize that the paper silver products or things like that are essentially worthless, and the price is just ridiculous. And they try to withdraw the silver, and now it'd only take a couple hours before the COMEX would shut down. So these are incredibly interesting times. If you don't own any silver or gold right now, and I've said this for a while, you probably will have a hard time getting some now. And I think in a few more months, or definitely another year, you probably can't get any at all. So if you don't have any, and that's what they want to do, they want to trap everyone into this, the banks. That's why they're trying to move towards a cashless society right now, because they don't want anyone to even have Federal Reserve notes, dollar bills, because they can't control that as much. And even in places like Europe, they actually have negative interest rates. So then the economists come out and say, well, a lot of people are starting to withdraw their money because it actually costs them money to keep it in a bank. And so then they say, well, I guess we'll have to outlaw cash. So they want to get everyone into these banking systems, and then they're going to collapse the entire fiat system and impoverish pretty much everybody. So if you have any sort of physical hard assets at that point, you will be so much in a better shape than 98% of the people in the world, just by having some physical metal. And in the Weimar Republic in Germany, in the early 1900s, when they hyperinflated their currency, the German mark, to zero, it was said, and I've gotten some verification on it, that someone bought a hotel, which turned out to become a giant hotel chain, apparently, for about 3 gold coins at the time, because everyone was so wiped out by the currency collapse. So these are the kind of risks involved, and also the kind of rewards. In times of crisis, of course, is a chance, a potential to make extraordinary generational wealth, because especially when hardly anyone else knows about these sort of things. But you have to be smart, and that's why people really need to pay attention. They have to turn off their TV. If you're in school for anything, Bachelor of Arts or anything, just get out, make as much money as you can as quickly as possible, get into gold and silver, get out of the U.S. if you can, or Europe. Europe's going to be a smoldering heap in a couple years, I believe, or even less, maybe even in the next few months. Really, it's looking that way. Every paradigm that people have subscribed to, just forget about it. It's over. And it's funny that you brought up the 9/11, and people just don't want to know. I actually told my father about 9/11. I said, this was about 10 years ago when I started to really discover what had happened. And I said, this is unbelievable information, Dad. You have to know this. And I started telling him, and he said, stop. I don't want to know. And I didn't ask him why he didn't want to know. I was just confused because I want to know everything. I'm a very curious person. I want to know what's going on.
Me too.
And I thought about it afterwards. And if everything that I was saying then and even now is true, then his whole life in one way or another was sort of a lie, because he always believed government was there to help him. He paid a lot of taxes, and he believes the police are there to protect him. He does, and they also have the media propaganda as well. So your entire life, you're seeing, oh, the president just saved the country again, or the wonderful, amazing police just, saved these people again on Law and Order, or whatever it is. And so all this programming and all this brainwashing for an entire lifetime, people are very scared to let that go, because if they do, they think that their entire world was, their entire life was a lie. The entire thing they thought the world was a lie, and it was. But to me, it's not scary to realize that. It's actually empowering. So we need to find a way to get people to realize this is very empowering information once you know it. It can seem scary if you didn't know any of it. get over that fear phase as quickly as possible, and then you have nothing but opportunity as you can see what's going on and you can make moves to protect yourself and also profit from what is going on.
Yeah, and I know that we probably have to let you go here pretty soon, but I'm so engaged in this conversation. Just a couple more questions as it relates to your father. We all know people like your dad, and friends, family, neighbors. So many people are like that, and that kind of intellectual dishonesty or that lack of intellectual curiosity used to make me very, very angry as it pertained to waking people up about the Federal Reserve, 9/11, false flag terror in general. But now it makes me sad because these people are going to be trapped in the matrix until the day they die. And that's really a very sad thing because they will never reach their full human potential, right? To be engaged with humanity. I like to say, Jeff, at this point, it's humanity versus the banksters. And, unless we wake up humanity, and unless humanity has the courage to wake up, we're never going to take this thing back. So let's turn our attention to the Shemitah. Let's turn our attention to September, October. This past week was really fairly quiet in the news. What's going on with the Shemitah? Where's the collapse? Are they going to be able to string this thing along for another year?
Well, we'll see. There's so many things in play right now. I did that Shemitah Expose video, and it's still very relevant today for anyone that hasn't seen it. That in July 14th of this year, and I said I expected major market collapses, crashes, crisis, wars, all to start to begin, not to actually end on that day, but actually begin to start on that day, and it actually started a few weeks earlier. Of course, we had over 20 since that time, since July 14th, over 23 stock markets around the world have gone into serious crash scenarios, including China, which is of course the biggest. And then in the end of August, the Dow Jones had its biggest one-day intraday point drop of 1,100 points, which is just a massive amount near the end of August, and it's down about 2,500 points since I made that video. So this is already in play. I don't know if there's going to be an exact day or an exact crash, but it's just the trend is down now. This market is over. This system is over, and it's going to be very volatile. Though we could see up days of 800 points in the next few weeks or months, and we could see down days of 800 or 2,000 points. This is a very volatile. So this is a major change from the past 7 years, and which was sort of my point about the Shemitah, is that these things seem to go in 7 year cycles. Right. For whatever reason. You can look into all kinds of reasons why. It's even quite well known on Wall Street. It was just that I was the first sort of financial type person to put the dots together, that it was actually, you can actually take it down to exact dates, because on the last two Shemitah end days in 2008 and 2001 were the last two major market collapses in the U.S. And I said this year we're not going to see that because the end day was actually on September 13th, which was a Sunday. The UN opens today. They want to bring in this one world government sort of thing. The Federal Reserve meets Thursday, so this will already be live by then. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm going to make a prediction. Well, I could be totally wrong. You never know. These people, it's so sad that we have like just a few people controlling the entire economy and financial system. This is ridiculous. That's not capitalism. But if they do raise rates, we'll see what happens. It's very interesting. A lot of stuff going on. So we'll see what happens. I'm expecting nothing but craziness to continue over the next few months. We're definitely not going back to a good economy. Things aren't going to be fine. This should be for the next few months for sure. Just nothing but a rolling series of crisis and volatility and chaos and collapses, in my opinion. And if I'm wrong, it's no way it's going to last much more than a year. And actually, the more I keep looking into it, the more I think we have about 1 to 2 years until the final, just everything is washed away, sort of collapse. But who knows? It could happen sooner, and it's already in process. So, yeah, there's so many things going on, and for people to think, as I just pointed out, in the last week, the Eurozone essentially collapsed. No one's really even talking about it. That's how bizarre this sort of thing is. And a lot of people in Europe will say, oh, well, it didn't really change my life. I just went to work today. I still got a paycheck. And I'm like, yeah, but that's a fairly major change that all of a sudden in the last few weeks, and especially on Sunday, there was border borders put up all around Europe and fences put up. And a lot of the responses from some of the people was, oh, well, that's just temporary. Well, there's nothing more sure than a temporary government measure never goes away. That's happened all throughout history. Whenever they say it's temporary, it usually never goes away, including the time in 1971 when Richard Nixon temporarily removed the gold backing away from the dollar due to money speculators, and still to this day there is no gold backing the dollar. So if you're not paying attention, these things can just seem that way. Oh, well, it's just because of these refugees that we need all these borders all of a sudden. And I'm sure it'll just go away in a couple of weeks. But if you look deeper and deeper and deeper, and you can see and connect the dots, you can see what's going on. They're trying to create some sort of crisis, chaos, war, and fence people in. They're literally putting up fences, like major fences, on some of these borders right now, including one on Serbia and Hungary, I believe. And and that's supposed to go up today. So every day something's happening. This is if turn off the TV, because first of all, you're going to get mostly wrong information, but you're also going to get a false sense of security, because they will never tell you what we're telling you here, and we are telling you, in my opinion, obviously the truth. But pretty much all the things we're talking about is quite factual. You can look it up yourself. There's an old saying, and I never knew what it meant until very recently, that the revolution will not be televised. And so no matter how crazy this gets, how bad it gets, CNN and CNBC will never tell you how bad it is. So that I think was the point of that quote. But that quote was obviously made before the internet. So now that the revolution will be podcast, but it won't be televised.
Yeah. Well, you and I will be televising it, my friend. Okay, last couple of things. You said that, the more research you do, the more you think this thing may get stitched together for another year or two. And it reminds me of the 1988 cover of The Economist, which on the cover is burning dollars in a phoenix rising from the ashes. And it says, "Get ready for a world currency." And around the bird's neck is a world currency coin that says 2018. So it does seem that the plan's been in place for a very, very long time. And here it comes. Here comes the new world currency. All right, last thing. For the benefit of everyone listening, Jeff, what do you think Americans can learn from Zimbabwe and what we're seeing in Venezuela with the Bolivar?
So you're asking what we can learn from past hyperinflations. There's been, of course, literally hundreds of hyperinflations in the history of the world. That's the normalcy bias you're pointing out, that Americans, they're told all the time through the media and programming that they live in the freest country in the world, which is totally not true by any metric. It's one of the least free countries in the world, in my opinion. And it's also the most powerful and richest country, when in fact it's actually the most indebted country in human history by far. Of course, the G7 is just the meeting of the 7 most indebted, bankrupt countries. This is the kind of things they do. So just get outside of, realize that that is the case. What I think is going to happen, and this is why I think it's so serious, is when Zimbabwe happened, or even Venezuela right now, or Argentina, which happens every 10 years, almost to the date. It's like a national sport in Argentina to have hyperinflation and destroy the peso. But the thing with those were they were just small countries, and they were just happened in one country. So, for example, when it happened in Zimbabwe, a lot of people who were smart, a lot of people who are kind of like the kind of people listening to this program right now, were trading their Zimbabwe dollars before it totally collapsed for South African rand or US dollars or gold or silver while they still could. So they had that option. The U.S. dollar is now essentially the world's reserve currency, and that's what most central banks hold as their reserve currency. So when the dollar collapses, there's not going to be another place to run very easily. There's not going to be another currency, because I actually think all the other currencies will collapse before the dollar. The dollar will probably be the last to collapse, but this is all going to happen very fast once it starts. I think the yen's going down, the euro. We've seen all the things happening in Europe in the last few months. Everyone's forgotten about Greece already, but that was quite serious. And Spain, France, they're all bankrupt. They're just as bad as Greece, Portugal, Italy. And now they're taking in literally hundreds of thousands of refugees to go on welfare when they have their youth in Spain. The youth unemployment rate's 50%. So let's bring in a bunch of more people and put them on welfare. So these things are going down. And because everything's backed by the US dollar nowadays, there's really not going to be many places to run. And that's why I said that we're going to see at some point, and I think fairly soon, definitely in the next few years, and as soon as in the next few months. I don't think it'll happen that quick, but definitely in the next 1 to 2 years. Not much longer than that. If it lasts till the end of the decade, I'd be incredibly surprised the way I see things. But people just are going to be running out of options on where they can protect themselves. Silver is already becoming very hard to get in many places around the world, including the U.S. We have many quotes from some of the silver coin providers saying that they're either out or they're very close to being out, and soon they'll be out if they're not already out. So you're going to be running out of options very quickly. So people need to be paying attention. I would suggest they go to surviveshemitah.com, and it's kind of hard to spell, but it's survive Shemitah, which is SHEMITAH.com. Put in your email, and then we have a free white paper on how to survive what's coming. And we also have a free book on there that I wrote called Shemitah Trends, which outlines how we got to this situation and what's going to happen in the coming months and years. And then as well, we have an offer if you want to subscribe to the Dollar Vigilante newsletter. We're offering a discounted offer there. And then we update our subscribers very regularly with all of the things going on. And there's so much going on. So this, when the dollar collapses, it's not going to be like when the Zimbabwe dollar collapses or the Venezuelan Bolivar or the Argentina Peso. It's going to rock the world. And China and Russia are getting prepared for it right now. And you should be too.
Well, what a perfect way to end this discussion, Jeff. We surely do appreciate your time and your expertise. And your site, of course, is dollarvigilante.com. Anything else you want to tell us about your world's largest international anarcho-capitalist conference, which is coming up, I believe, in February?
Yeah, that's right. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I won't go into what that is if you don't know it, but just look it up. It essentially means I want freedom in both my personal life and financial life. And we have the largest conference of its type coming up February 19th, 21st in Acapulco called Anarchapulco, also hard to spell, ANARCHAPULCO.com. With the internet nowadays, it's not that hard to just click on a link, but to actually spell out some of these words, I have to maybe think about using different words that are easier to say. But yeah, that'll be a great conference as well. That we have a lot of people from around the world coming to. A lot of people talking about building the next generation of systems, sort of getting ahead of these collapses to come, including a lot of Bitcoin-related stuff, all sorts of things to essentially move beyond what's going on right now and build a much more peaceful and prosperous world.
Well, very good, Jeff. And guys, we do appreciate you tuning in to watch this one. What great information Jeff's given us here. Actionable information. Protect yourselves, protect your family. Wake up your friends and family to the true horrors of 9/11. People need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps in this country. Wake up before it's too late. And our guest has been Jeff Berwick from the dollarvigilante.com. Jeff, thanks so much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Peace, brother. And guys, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting us at sgtreport.com, thephaser.com, and thelibertymill.com. Real news 24/7. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.